Okay. Can you move on seamlessly?
Yeah. In the Galen Ross book, Madeline tells about 40 people being at that party, including Helen Thomas, who was big name reporter and hated LBJ. There was this police officer, I can't remember his name, not a Dallas cop, but a famous police officer who was a crusader for truth, justice, and the American way, and he was supposedly there, which made no sense. And Connolly was supposedly there, plus Mac Wallace et al. And I read it and I said, this is nonsense. And I called Madeline up and I said, listen, I saw what was attributed to you in this book about 40 people being there, including Hoover. I said, Hoover was at his desk the next morning at 7:30 and he didn't like to fly. Well, he would have flown to get JFK dead, maybe. I said, why Connolly? I said, I pulled out the tape that I made with you in 1993 and there was no Connolly on there. And her answer was along the lines of, well, I couldn't mention Connolly back then because it would have just made a nasty mess out of, it would have pointed fingers. I said, Madeline, you said the party was about Kennedy being killed. Johnson took you aside and said the whole problem's over tomorrow. What more could Connolly have added to that? And she had no answer. And she died not all that long after that. I remember meeting Chuck Brem, super guy, just bumped into him. I met the umbrella guy, totally nuts. He was an umbrella collector. Never left home without one. Gene Hill, interesting. I got a phone call one night from the Sexton building, which is a building that housed a company called the Texas School Book Depository. And it was Harold, one of the three black guys. Bonnie Ray Williams, Junior Jarman, Harold.
Norman.
It was Harold Norman. And I'd read his testimony. I'd seen him on the trial with Jerry Spence and Bugliosi. And as a witness, did you know about that? Yes, sir. Did you have any awareness of such and such? No, sir. Sounded just like himself on the phone. And he said, look, I got a story to tell. And it's big. I said, well, don't tell me over the phone. I said, write everything down. I said, and write everything down, not just the story. What kind of cars interested you in 1963? What was your favorite food? Just, who were you and the story? Yes, sir. I called back about 2 weeks later because I didn't hear anything. And I'm convinced I was calling a boarding house. And he was not there. So I got a hold of Jay Harrison. I said, Jay, you know anything? Can you find out? And he did. And Harold Norman was dead. And I said, listen, find out, run this phone number, which was the boarding house. I said, he might have written stuff down and his wife might still have it. See what you can do. The wife was dead too. That was, were 300 people killed just to hide the truth? No. But we don't know how many were.
Well, I'd like to ask you about Jay Harrison in a moment because he's a pretty he was obviously passed 20 years ago, but he was a low profile researcher, I think. And I think
he was scared.
I think the participants here be interested in that. But there was just one quick question that I want to ask on behalf of Scott. And it's fundamental. Do you think that the Murchison House party existed or not?
I don't know, but I'll tell you, an event that happened that colors that party Supposedly, the party was mentioned in a society column in the November 22nd, one of the two newspapers, the Morning News or the Dallas Herald, whatever. And I had all of those papers, and it wasn't mentioned. And the society columnist was a woman named Val Im, I-M-M. And she had gone on to marry one of the Parkland doctors in attendance with JFK, Dr. Faoud Bashor. And I called her down in Texas, and I introduced myself, researcher, writer, idle, curious, whatever. Is there any truth in your experience? Because supposedly you wrote the story. I never read it, but supposedly you wrote it about a party at the Murchison's house the night before the assassination. And she went on and on without saying. I said, ma'am, excuse me. I asked you a yes or no question. Yes, you know something about it. No, you don't. And I'll hang up. She said, look, there's a long story here, and I got a house full of guests, and we're cooking, and call me back Friday morning, okay? I said, sure. Click. Call back Friday morning. I got their housekeeper, and they were on vacation in the Bahamas. That's as far as I got with Val Im and the Murchison party. The problem is you're talking about Murchison Jr., and his residence was a good hour's ride from Fort Worth. So that's a challenge for LBJ to be there and have it over at 11 o'clock or whenever, and Hoover and Nixon and, all the boys. It made a great story for Madeline.
But wasn't the story didn't it come from a servant or a waitress? Is that how it emerged, the story?
One of them, I don't know if that's how it emerged, but that's where it was covered on The Men Who Killed Kennedy. Which I went through 13 hours of bright lights in my eyes for 4 minutes of tape. And I don't know. Some of the people on there were undoubtedly legit. Jay Harrison provided the contact material for a lot of the people in those last episodes. And Judy Baker was not one of them he provided. He called me up. Well, he says, she's crying and there's no tears. Well, some people cry differently. I don't know. Who did it is not the only mystery that's on the table today.
Sure. I do want to spend some time, again, before I open it up to general questions, I do want to spend some time talking about the Dallas police, because I think that's one of your fortes. And perhaps we can bring Jay Harrison into the conversation about the police in general. But just one other question I wanted to ask before we get onto that area is you had a thorough visit of the TSBD with Gary Mack. And I'm fascinated by that, because I'd like to, I presume it's when he'd become the curator of the museum. So he'd fully turned at that point, I guess. But what was the, when you say thorough visit, are we talking basement to roof? Did you get to explore the stairwells and the elevators?
Oh, yeah, sure. The stairwells are unique because they open onto each floor. So if somebody is taking the stairs from the 6th floor down, you jump into the stairwell on the 6th floor and you go around and you come out onto the floor on the 5th floor. And that was something that I brought up with Harold Norman. Did you guys actually see anybody come out of that stairwell? No, we didn't. And then you get back inside and you go around and eventually you're down there. The basement had the Hertz sign. And it was just taking up all kinds of room. There were a couple of sets of the 26 volumes. Manning Clements, who was an FBI agent at the time, possibly stationed in Dallas, was one of the people who donated his set to the 6th floor museum. the first floor was the most curious thing. What went on here? And, stuff was wrapped in paper. Well, Oswald, took the paper home from the paper and the tape home from the shipping department to wrap the rifle on November 21st. Problem with that is the tape comes out of the machine wet. I don't know how he could have done that. And of course, when I saw it, it was no longer a Texas School Book Depository Company. They were gone after maybe 1964. A lot of places went belly up besides the Carousel Club. A lot of it was empty space.
So this was pre the all the governmental departments moving into various
They were in
floors.
the process. Yeah, they were in the process of moving in.
Right.
And Harold Norman still worked there, which
Interesting. Wow.
for whatever reason.
And that rear extension hadn't been built with the elevator, the modern elevator, no?
Not the first time, no.
Okay, so in effect, it was just a redundant building.
Yes.
That looked to a great extent like it did in '63.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the stairwells. I mean, something I discovered within the last 2 years is just how heavy those doors were, and the two doors on each floor on the stairwell. So, if you're having to open and close those doors whilst you're running up or downstairs,
It's all time consuming.
it's time consuming, but B, it's so noisy.
That too. And you have to say one of two things is true. Either there was tremendous commotion already noise-wise, or everybody was shocked into stunned silence, and you would have heard a mouse running across Jello in sneakers. But you're talking about a building that's 110 feet by 110 feet square.
Mm.
You got to run from one corner of the building, and I'm assuming you're running. You got to go from there to a point off the beaten path to hide a weapon. Then you got to get back on the beaten path, finish, get to the far corner, downstairs. The FBI used, the Warren Commission and the FBI used a Dallas Secret Service agent named John Joe Howlett to match Oswald's timing. He was able to get from North Beckley, 1026 North Beckley, to the Tippet site in the amount of time they believed he had to get there. Howlett also went from the 6th floor window over the river and through the woods down to the soda machine in enough time for Marion Baker to see him. Now, who knows how fast?
Well, I agree with you. It's a much smaller space inside once you're there. And he was 24. I guess he was fit. I know
he wasn't an Olympic sprinter either.
But I think as a 24-year-old, I think you can do that, and I think you can go down steps at several steps at a time.
Sure. Absolutely.
But the problem is, if the lunchroom encounter is valid, you are going to be either A, sweating, or B, very much out of breath. Right?
You're going to be tired, and if you're the guy that was with the finger on the trigger, you're going to be just a little tense when
you are going to, and it's at odds with this alleged very calm demeanor that Marion Baker reports on. So
of course, Marion Baker is not the sharpest knife in the drawer either.
No.
there were police that pointedly said he was as far back in the motorcade as he was because they didn't want him in any important spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he went on to Parkland, didn't he, afterwards? Didn't he go on to Parkland?
Yeah. I believe he did.
So, that in itself is absurd, isn't it? I mean, if he thinks this is a crime scene, why is he not
yeah.
part of the you know,
never,
as allegedly the first entrant, you know,
was
law
never
enforcement.
treated as a crime scene. Not the
Yeah.
plaza, not the building, not
Well,
any
that
of
was
the other buildings.
that was one of my that was one of my questions regarding the whole police thing. I just want to ask the audience: do we want to have a break here, a comfort break, or a drinks break, or do you want me to just press on here? Anybody want to stop for a couple of minutes?
Half an hour from now, I can feed the dog.
Do you want to go and I can feed my dog? Should we do that? Ryan, you
30
around?
minutes. Let's do another 30 minutes and then we'll feed Stinky.
You want to do it in 30?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm here. I can stop the recording, Neil.
Well,
Yep.
hang on. Are we stopping now, Walt, or are we stopping in 30 minutes?
Up to you. Up to you.
Keep going.
All right, let's stop now for a couple of minutes, Ryan. We can feed the dogs, go to the loo, get a drink, whatever. Yeah.
Time for Pan.
Okay. Hudson.
I see is it true that Marion Baker was sitting across the table from Oswald at the DPD shortly after his arrest, but never identified? I don't know where. Okay, across the table from Oswald DPD. No, I don't know. I don't believe so. No. Marion Baker. No. The question below is the prayer man, and I don't know anything. I've never seen enough to convince me that Oswald's on the steps. There's a question from Tony. Did Marina ever discuss how well Lee could speak Russian? And it's a critical question. I had a guest here for quite some time from Russia, a one-time resident of Moscow, of the female religion. And in Russia, for what it's worth, if you want any kind of mid-level job, you have to sit for 5 examinations. And I guarantee you, if that was the situation in the US, nobody'd get the jobs because we don't speak and write English anymore. I showed this person the commission exhibit number 1, I think it was, the letter that Oswald told Marina, you know, if I'm captured, go to the corner where you, whatever. What can you tell me about this letter? How long was this person supposedly in Russia? I said, 2 years and change. Not possible. She said, this comma's missing, but the letters, what is written is near perfect. And she said, 95% of the Russian population could not have written that letter. I was like, whoa. I mean, I tried to learn some Russian to speak to this person, and Russian is a very, very difficult language for a lot of reasons that we don't have time for here, but it's very difficult.
So where are you going with that? Well, are you going?
Well,
Are you saying he was a naturalized, you know, Eastern European?
One of two things is
Russian?
true. Either he was born Russian,
Yeah. Or
Eastern
he started learning it in the military,
or
civil air patrol, or
somebody else was responsible for that letter.
Okay.
Because there's a bunch of little things in Russia that, so the letter B, it's just a small lowercase b. If it has a hook on it going forward on the top, it changes it. If it has a hook on the back, it changes it. If it's capitalized, it's changed. In English, tooth and teeth, that's it. In Russian, there's 7 or 8 words, which suggest a tooth or 3 teeth or 9 teeth. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. And I can't imagine going back to Lee Oswald. Did you shoot the president? Nobody asked me about that. Lee Oswald was not literate enough in English to be that literate in Russian. I mean, he just didn't have the right stuff. So something is wrong with that letter. What exactly? I don't know. I see the question over here, that there was a comment by Marina about, yeah, she thought Oswald was from the Baltic areas. Because there's also dialects involved, very serious dialects. I went to the theater with my Russian friend to see a Russian opera. I don't recommend it. At halftime, she could walk through the area, where they sell the drinks and the beer. They're from Ukraine. Oh, they're from Belarus. And she's looking down on them because she's from Moscow. So there's a lot of variation there that we just can't account for in Oswald's perfect Russian. And it was, except for commas and the likes of it, it was as good as it gets.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's move on to the Dallas police. So, in my mind, we've got several things going on here. We've got the possibility of bad apples, bad actors within the police department at senior level right through to grunt level, who are, ex ante involved in this thing, the planning and or execution. We've obviously got the whole cover-up process, which extends way beyond the police. I mean, it's everywhere, from the FBI to the media, to the CIA, to the Warren Commission, whatever. And we know clearly that there's going to be Dallas police that are involved in the cover-up. They want to hang on to their pensions and want to get promotion and so forth and just toe the party line. And then you've got this question of negligence and incompetence. They're poor investigations. There's no crime scenes set up. It's not just the TSBD, it's Dealey Plaza, or it's 10th and Patton, it's the Texas Theater. So you've got issues there. Poor investigations. There's no door-to-door searches from 1026 Beckley to 10th and Patton. You've got clear failings in the lineups down in City Hall. I mean, that is absurd. Chain of evidence. I mean, Johnny Cairns, this is his big bugbear. The failings on the chain of evidence side. And probably the biggest one is the protection of Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, that is absolutely absurd that happened, in the basement. So we know there's a chunk of incompetence and a chunk of negligence. We know they're heavily involved in the cover-up, but I'm very interested in, because you don't name names in treachery in Dallas, but you go through a lot of areas where you think this is clearly, the DPD setting this thing up. Where are you now, 25 years on? I mean, do you feel comfortable that you can pin it down to some particularly, bad apples? And are you confident that, this is what happened? It was the police on the bridge, or there wasn't the police between Elm and Houston and the bridge, or whatever? I mean, how are you feeling now, 25 years on?
Well, I'm really feeling certainly leaning more in terms of what your question poses. Misfeasance, malfeasance, stupidity, intent. Clearly, the protection was wholly inadequate. Motorcade and basement. And it was inadequate in several senses. Number one, if your day off was Friday, you were home on November 22nd. If you woke up with a gassy stomach, you called up and said, "I'm not coming in today." Okay, Feel better? No. President's coming to town, you're all on duty. There's just things that happen, you know, soldering down manhole covers, all kinds of crazy stuff. None of that was done. And I want to add something here. There's been a lot of talk that there should have been a military presence with regard to the motorcade. And when I hear that, I say to people, okay, show me where there was a military presence in other motorcades. And I haven't seen any. What I have seen is like, you know, the school band would show up from some school, but it was an ROTC group. So yeah, it looks like military, but it's a bunch of kids with painted rifles. And it was the same thing in the basement. You know, if you were on that day, you worked. If you weren't, you weren't. And when you think about the protection scenario in the basement, Oswald's bodyguard is Will Fritz, and he's 68 years old. Then you got Lavelle and Graves alongside, one of whom jumped out of the way and subsequently had an award for protection named for him, Jim Lavelle. And behind him is L.D. Montgomery, just on the odd chance in case Oswald tried to escape back into the jail. All the other cops are watching. And the point of reference, and it's current. If you have if you've been lucky enough to see any of the video material from Taylor Swift's 148 shows, her security people are standing with their back is to the stage, and they're looking out at the crowd. The problem with the Dallas cops is they were watching the motorcade.
Yeah.
The problem also is there's very little in terms of records of who was supposed to be where. I read an article saying there was nobody between the corner of Houston and Elm and the bridge, and there were people. They're just not listed. And why aren't they listed? Because they'd be witnesses to something maybe they didn't want to admit to hearing or seeing. The two guys on the bridge, Neil and I talked about this the other day, the pathological liars, Foster and White. The train was going across. No, it wasn't. You could see them in the photographs. I mean, they're right there. There's no train. And their perceptions were managed. You know, not necessarily by the CIA or Cuban exiles, but their perceptions were managed. And that could have been governmentally done. Very easy. Like you said, pensions. Some of the things that have been said and done, I've read 150 times about Johnson's Secret Service agent jumping over the seat and climbing on top of Johnson. Never seen a picture of it. But I did finally see one. But it took 50 years before I saw it. I remember asking Jay Harrison. We were out by Love Field. He had a connection out there. Got him all kinds of stuff, computer stuff. And I didn't want to come right out and say, listen, how could you have worked with the things that are said about the Dallas police in terms of them being John Birchers or Minutemen or who knows who? Proud Boys, Oath Keepers. I think I said something along the lines of, Jay, you know, politically, the Dallas police do not have a real good reputation. What can what's your take on that? And we pulled up to a stoplight, and in the car next to us, there was an African-American driving and a white woman in the front seat. And he looked and he said, if this was 1963, I would pull that guy over immediately. And I said, for what? He said, loud paint on the car. What's the difference? We'd pull him over, clowning in a no clowning zone. But we'd send her home and he'd go to jail.
So do you want to just enlighten the group how you got to know Jay? And he was a reservist, wasn't he? Wasn't
Yes,
he was,
yes, yes.
can you just give a little bit of a
Yeah,
background to Jay?
Jay was a reserve officer, and his business was real estate, and he was very good at it because he was a genealogist. And he could take you to a property and say, beauty of this is, in the Civil War, that house was lived in by a Confederate colonel, and that would jack the price immediately. Because his Kennedy stuff was primarily genealogical. He could go back 3 decades, 3 generations into something wrong with this guy here. And I don't know where he got my name from, but he called me, and he was in this room. He called me one night. This was when he was warming up to the Mac Wallace fingerprint stuff. And he said, Walt Brown, yeah. My name is Jay Harrison. I was a reserve Dallas police officer in 1963. And he talked for a couple of minutes, and on that desk right there, I had a copy of the Warren Commission Index, the book. So I quick flipped it open, Jay Harrison. I said to him, let's see, Jay Harrison. Seems to me your name showed up somewhere like in volume 12 around page 350. And he was thunderstruck. How do you know that? Well, I know it. I read the volume. I didn't know that I'd indexed them. But that got us going. And he called me any number of times. I mean, we probably had 5 phone calls a day for 5 years on average. And that would include times when we were together.
But did he not show you around Dallas
Oh,
to
yes.
all the kind of off-piste areas, you know?
At the risk of going out on a limb here, he took me to the gas station where there was a hole in the wall where people used to watch General Walker entertain his boyfriends.
Oh, okay.
1026 North Beckley. How many bedrooms?
Ryan, we should know this. We were there. 22, is it? Something like that?
22 or 26.
Yeah,
I
if
think
you
I think
include
it's 22.
the annex and the basement, yeah.
If you're driving along and 1026 is on your left, you go past it just a little bit, there's a turn in, and it takes you down an alley, and you can go behind 1026. And when I was there with Jay, there were 9 cable TV hookups on that back garage. So people living in those times, Oswald's room was a broom closet, but there were people that were renters that had cable TV in that resident. And you look at it, you never think it's 22 bedrooms. And the Warren Commission certainly didn't make note of that, because one of the guys that was there had the same name as one of Ruby's musicians, and that immediately looked out of order. But yeah, he took me to a lot of, particularly because of his genealogy, he took me to cemeteries. And he said, okay, Roscoe White is buried right here, and John Melvin Liggett's buried right over there. That means something. It meant more to Jay than it did to me, but it meant something. Then we pulled into a place, I mean, just off a highway somewhere, overgrown with weeds, but it was maybe a 200 plot cemetery. Row 1, plot 1 was Rose Sharami by her real name. And somebody came running out. What are you doing? What are you doing? So Jay pulled out some kind of badge. I don't know, his Dallas badge. He'd flick the badge and goes, we're in the Witness Protection Society. We want to make sure that grave wasn't touched. I'm trying to think other places we went that were off the beaten path. Well, he wanted to retrace the path that Liggett took with his family to go to southern Texas to get away from whatever was going on in Dallas after he disappeared for 24 hours, got home, packed the family up, and off they went. So we're going down the highway, and he pulls off the road, and we're in a place like a campus, industrial campus like area. And he says, make a U-turn, but don't go on the grass. Kind of hurt me. I made a U-turn. There was a helicopter on top of us with a light. You there? What are you doing? That was the Super Collider on the west side of the I-9, whatever it is, I-70. 2 miles more, he takes me into this college campus, Department of Humanities, Department of English, Department of this. It was the base that the Branch Davidian raid was staged from. We went all the way through the campus, all 10 buildings, and out in the back. In the back, there was a 9,000-foot runway. I saw 5 commercial aircraft, Qantas and United are 2 that I remember the best. And they had the AWACS configurations on them. So commercial airliners were doing spy missions and they were landing there. And that's the kind of stuff that he was really on top of. I mean, he knew who all the players were. There were people that he felt had something to do with something here or there. Elizabeth Forthling Harris was one of them. She was one of the Texas Democratic Committee members that had too much to do with the motorcade or whatever. He was the one that told me, find out who's in the cars. Well, the first car was the pilot car. The second car was driven by the head of the Texas National Guard, who was a Dallas cop. And interestingly enough, the other guy in the car is alternately described as Whitmire, W-H-I-T Meyer, or Wedemeyer, W-E-D-E. I mean, either way, that individual is military intelligence. And he'd been military intelligence for many years. Jay had done a lot of work in terms of de Mohrenschildt. And he said, look, why is de Mohrenschildt buying oil leases in Cuba in the 1950s, along with, James Powell, the guy who was standing opposite the front door of the book depository on November 22nd. He said, what was he doing there? To me. And I said he was probably making sure that Oswald didn't come out front to buy lunch because he couldn't have been on the 6th floor and having a hot dog on the ground. Okay. He knew the ambulance people. Aubrey Reich, there was another guy named Peanuts something. He knew the Texas Theater very well. Because every time they tried to reopen the Texas Theater, it caught fire without fail. Without fail.
So did Jay have any, credible suspicions of any of the, let's call them, the sort of usual suspects, whether it's Westbrook and Croy, whether it's Nelson Menzel or Harry Olsen, Sergeant Hill? I mean, all of these names come up.
He was always curious about everybody.
Yeah.
He kind of figured Croy was in the wrong place at the wrong time when he showed up at being the first on scene with the Tippet, and Westbrook getting there. But he didn't have enough to convince, well, me or him. I don't know how you phrase it. He would get phone calls. We'd be sitting there chewing the fat at his house, and the phone would ring. Oh, I want you to say hello to somebody. And next thing I know, I'm talking to the guy, Nick McDonald, the cop that got slugged by one of the other cops when Oswald was taken down in the theater. He took me to meet Jerry Hill, which I shared with Neil the other day. Hill seemed to be a pretty straight up guy, because one difference of opinion that Jay and I always had was about the morality of J.D. Tippet. I had said, you know, he's got his finger in a lot of pies. And Jay was like, no, listen, I knew JD very well. Took me to his grave and told JD's grave that we're going to find out who killed him. But he said, no, he's a straight arrow. When the shift ended, 9 guys would go to the bar and JD would go home to work on his wife's antique car or whatever. And when we were with Jerry Hill, I made a point of saying to Hill, listen, Tippet, good guy, bad guy. And Jay jumped right in and said, Jerry, he called him Geraldine. He said, Geraldine, Walt thinks Tippet was amoral, in a lot of trouble. And I told him better. I told him otherwise. I wouldn't let him go on with that. And Jerry looked at him and he said, Jay, if he'd have lived 6 more months, he'd have been divorced. And that was the end of us talking about Tippet ever. And that was Memorial Day 1998. So Jay and I were together for another five plus years. But
why do you think that Tippet was somewhat recognized in the North Oak Cliff area? I mean, his patrol district was pretty much almost as far south in the greater Dallas area as you could get. I mean, it was only just slightly higher than Bill Anglin's. So he was 6 miles at least outside of his normal district. Why do you think that Tippet was, you know, when you've got the site, people at the there's 5 witnesses at the Glocko station that know Tippet. You know, you've got the Davis sisters that thought he may have lived next door or
across the street,
you know, across whatever. How do you interpret that?
Well, the people that I talked to, and I can't remember who all of them were, because Jay knew a bunch of people. And, you know, Jerry Hill was important for me to speak to because he was in the front seat when Oswald was taken to jail. The rest of them were not always as significant. But what came across to me anyhow was that Tippet was just a garden variety jackass. And those kind of people get remembered. The gal that was selling the tickets at the theater, when she heard about J.D. Tippet, she said, well, he used to work here. He worked security, so to speak. He was a presence at the Texas Theater back as far as 1952. So she knew who he was. You know, he got around, and it's, you know, I wish I could put my finger on the exact people I talked to. Jay thought very highly of him, and I didn't. And that was one of the few things that we did not agree on, you know, full tilt. I see something over here about the guns of Texas are upon you. Scott? Do we have a Scott? Hi.
Yeah, I haven't got the book, Walt, but I'm aware of the book. I just wondered if I take it, is that about Jay?
It involves stuff from Jay. I don't know if anybody here knows the name Stephen Pegues. He was a younger guy. He was about 40, and he had done a lot of research on what he called the Texas Mafia. The movers and the shakers, the guys with the big money that could buy whatever they wanted. And again, Jay had computer connections, and he had gotten a computer set up for Pegues. Now Jay lived down below. He lived 110 miles south of Dallas. But he regularly came to Dallas, and he came up to Dallas with this computer equipment, and Pegues was going to give him a copy of the updated manuscript. And he waited and waited and waited. Nothing happened. Before long, he found out that Pegues had died in his sleep during the night. So he drove to the house. Where's his stuff? Oh, we put it out for the trash. It's gone already. Well, Jay had a copy of the manuscript. It wasn't the final copy. It was very rough. He gave it to me and said, can you do something with this? I said, yeah, I can do something with it. And I spent, I don't know, a couple of weeks, first of all, turning it into a manuscript and then adding stuff that Jay had mentioned or that I had learned here or there. And the Texas Mafia. And on July 5th of that summer, which would have been maybe 93, maybe 94, phone rings, my phone. And it's somebody from Texas. It was a woman. Is this Walt Brown? Yeah. You got a manuscript called The Texas Mafia? Yes, I do. Burn it. Why? I was working on it. I was going to turn it into something. You can't do that. You don't want to do that. Billy Saul Estes will come after you for life if you do anything with that book. Okay. So I took everything that I had learned from reading it and started from scratch, and that was the Guns of Texas. And basically, it was an argument that Johnson's involvement was overseeing the cover-up. LBJ was a coward. He would never step up and take any bold action. But covering up somebody else's bold action that helped him, sure. And he did. Right, Bandit? What is your take on Roy Tooley and Bill Shelley? James Tague called me and spent about a half an hour telling me that Roy Tooley was CIA. And I said, you're aware that he worked with the book depository companies from 1934 onward? Well, I wasn't sure of that, but he's CIA. I said, I'd sooner believe that Ruth Payne's sister was CIA. And he said, oh, that's rubbish. I said, no, she is CIA. Her name is Hoke, and she and hubby work in Langley. He didn't know that. He wanted a bunch of books that I had done. I said, look, you can have them $7 a piece. Is that fair? Yeah, it's great. I sent him 20 books. He signed where his name appeared in the books and sold them for $179. And I called him out on that. I said, that's a little ridiculous. But the management of the TSBD they weren't doing what they should have been doing when they were doing whatever it was they were doing. They could have done a lot more. That building was left empty for all kinds of hours. The crime scene guy, the Dallas police crime scene guy, not a business CEO by any means. He went down there to look for more evidence on Sunday morning. And he was working when Oswald was shot. He said, well, I called home and told Ma to put on the beans because the evidence, whatever we find here, is not going to mean anything. And it was just, the whole thing was done shabbily. That building should have been, they should have had police lights surrounding the place with guards.
That was going to be one of my questions, Walt, regarding the protocol of 1963, because
until they had gone through every nook and cranny necessary.
Have you come across? I mean, because it's easier to apply latter days, protocols and processes to, we all watch CSI and blah blah blah. Were you ever able to locate some kind of police manual that really set out what you should do? I mean, because obviously you look at the Texas Theatre, you look at, I mean, Dealey Plats are not being shut off, the TSBD not being shut off, quick enough. The fact that Tippet was removed from 10th and Patton, he was dead, right? And then obviously, the removal of the limousine, we can blame the Secret Service, the washing down of it. I mean, the removal of Kennedy's body. I mean, there's so many things that look fundamentally horrendous to today's standards. But have you found anything that?
No, but what it
Right.
should, where it should have been, would
Yeah.
have been in an FBI manual,
Mm.
how to. And like you said, start here and go there, and it's all poorly done.
Mm.
Stealing the body. Well, that was because Mrs. Kennedy was there and she wasn't going to leave without it. Well, so be it. It's a murder. It's a crime. It's not a federal crime. So it's got to be dealt with in Texas. I see Connolly's clothes over there. I'll get to that in a couple of seconds.
Well, the Harper, Paul has mentioned the Harper fragment. I mean, that's found the next day in Dealey Plaza, for God's sake, Just...
The first time I was ever in Dealey Plaza, where Mormon and Hill would have been standing or close to that, there's a manhole cover. And there's a gouge in the concrete that a bullet made. And it would have been from up on top of one of the buildings to south of the depository building, like the county records building. Oh, it's still there. There you go. Connolly's clothes. What is the question? I mean,
Well, they were taken home and cleaned, weren't they?
Eventually they were cleaned, but they were in the closet of Congressman Henry Gonzalez. And if you know anything about human body behavior, a shock as serious as being struck by a bullet will cause the bowels to just explode. And the reason that those clothes were clean was because Gonzalez couldn't stand the smell in his closet. And nobody had asked for them. Kennedy's clothes, they disproved the whole story. There's a hole in the upper back, which got moved to the bottom of the base of the neck, where there's no such place.
Peter, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate any more on the Connolly's clothes comment that you dropped in there while we've got Walt on the subject.
I'm all ears.
Just seeing if Peter's going to come off mute here.
What do you think? What do I think of gun running through TSBD? I don't know anything about that. That's something I'd put on Judy Baker's plate, but she didn't. She was having guns run through the Trade Mart in Louisiana. I recall Deputy Sheriff Seymour Weitzman testified he found a fragment of bone and gave it to what he thought was a Secret Service agent who wasn't none there, who may have been one of the assassins team. Possible, but it wouldn't have been found the next day. If somebody handed a piece of skull to somebody who was, in the cleanup crew, it would never been found. Anybody aware of the kid from Colorado that went sailing through Dallas on November 22nd? I can't think of his name. I've got it in it's in the chronology and it's elsewhere, but I haven't been working on this stuff for several years. There was a missionary coming home to Colorado from Arkansas, a Mormon missionary.
Yeah.
And his train stopped in Dallas at high noon, November 22nd. And what am I gonna do for an hour? Somebody said, there's a presidential parade right up the street. Oh, okay. Off he went. And he's right in the middle of everything, taking photographs. Uh-oh, gotta catch my train. Off he goes back to Union Station. Goes home. Next morning, 10 a.m., the FBI is knocking on his door in Colorado. We want your pictures. Says Robert Croft over here. I don't know if it was Robert Croft. Robert Croft was a photographer. There are Croft photos. Amazingly enough, just fun fact number one of the photographers in the motorcade is the man who took the picture of Truman holding the newspaper that says Dewey defeats Truman. Gun running through the TSBD, ATF presence there. Ralph Sinke. Ralph Sinke has insulted me enough times.
Can I come in? Sorry for a second, Walt, if
Sure.
that's okay with everyone.
Yeah.
Just a couple of things. You mentioned Judith Baker earlier on, and I know you've written a book, or I think you've written a book about Judith, oh, there it is. I don't know as if you wanted to say a few words on that, and also asked a question earlier, just out of interest, a personal interest that I have in the Walker shooting. If you have done any research on that, or
Well,
even if you have a view on.
in terms of what comes across with Walker, the Dallas police removed a .30-06 lead jacketed bullet or steel jacketed bullet,
It was steel jacketed, yeah.
which is a far cry from a 6.5 copper jacketed bullet that would have fit in Oswald's rifle.
Hmm.
I don't know. There's too many, a kid saw a car drive away, I don't know. And
You haven't specifically researched it or interviewed anybody.
the most amazing thing, I think, out of all of the Walker things you can say, I mean, this guy, he's to the right of Genghis Khan. And he showed up for the Warren Commission with a retired Army general as his attorney.
Yeah, Clyde Watts.
Watts. He swore up and down, Oswald didn't shoot me. And if anybody on God's green earth wanted to tar and feather Lee Oswald and the commies and whoever else, it would have been Walker. And he had the chance right there, and he didn't do it. And to me, that's highly significant. Hi, Johnny. Hi, Parker.
Parker.
What was the other question? Oh, Judith Baker.
Judith Baker.
Oswald was interrogated by the KGB, and he refused to answer their questions. So they apologized and gave him a nice apartment. The letters KGB will never be in a sentence that also includes the word apology. Oswald aided the Secret Service in looking for possible ambush sites for Kennedy's upcoming visit in Dallas. The Secret Service doesn't knock on doors of private citizens for help. And two, if they did, they weren't going to get help from somebody that that took the bus to work or anywhere and didn't even own a motor vehicle. Oswald flew Ferry's plane.
So do you take the view then that she's a complete fraudster, or the whole thing's made up? Or, I mean, did you ever speak to her? Have you ever had a chance to talk to her? Or
No,
No?
I never had. The first time I even knew of her existence was on The Men Who Killed Kennedy in 2003. And I've only been to Dallas one time since then, and that was in 2005. So I haven't been there in 20 years. We used to have meetings, serious gatherings here at the house. Somewhere around November 22nd. This year it would have been on the 23rd, because the 22nd, I think, was a Friday again this year. I don't know. And one of the things that always came up with Judy Baker, and the consensus was that she was somebody she was a pass-by. You know, she walked past Oswald at where they both worked, and that was it. But the rest of the story, it's just absolute fake. A 17-year-old girl breezes into New Orleans in the middle of the night, and within 3 days, she's on the inside of an international conspiracy to kill Fidel Castro. Anybody that believes that, listen, I got a bridge and it's beautiful. It connects New York to Brooklyn. It's just absurd. It's just absurd.
Well, I think you make a really good point in your book about the fact that who walks around New Orleans in 1963 speaking Russian to strangers.
Well, yeah. She met Oswald in the post office because he was doing one of his postal things. And the first thing they said was in Russian. They started talking to each other in Russian. And that was odd because she talked about what they said, but when it came to, she needed to say, okay. And she couldn't think of the word. And my ridiculously limited Russian, I knew it was she would have said Maladiet. But strangers hitting up conversations in Russian in New Orleans in 1963 brings to mind firing squads. What are you doing? Huh? You don't like her either? Big baby.
Walt, going back to the General Walker shooting, I mean, given the fact that he's extremely right wing, as you said, and so was the Dallas police, and you know, a good chunk of them were John Birch's. Do you think that they actually legitimately couldn't solve that case, or do you think they chose not to solve that case? Because it's odd. You'd think the one person that they'd be all over to, because given that they were politically aligned, you'd think they'd want to solve that, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. And it seems to me that it should have been solved. Absolutely should have been solved. And like in so many other things that have been mentioned, there weren't police present here, or this was done wrong, or there wasn't a protocol over here. This is another example. I mean, he's the poster boy for the cops.
Yeah.
He's their hero, putting aside his gas station activities. They would have turned heaven and earth. They would have worked overtime for free. They didn't.
It's odd, isn't it? So Paul wants to go down a rabbit hole. He was asking you, what's your take on Oswald in Mexico?
That's a tough one. Somebody on a bus went to a lot of trouble to convince other travelers and the two Australian girls that he was a former Marine who'd been to Russia. So somebody there is going to an awful lot of trouble to say, hey, look me over. The photographs of Oswald from Mexico City. Oswald weighs 135 pounds, and the guy in the picture is a linebacker with a crew cut. And Oswald didn't have that much hair. Sylvia Duran testifies that the guy was her height. She's 5'3". Oswald is 5'9" at one point and 5'11" at another point. And the treatment that Sylvia Duran got for all of the little bits and pieces that we've talked about where nothing was done, in her case, everything was done. They just kept arresting her and dragging her away. And she did not come out of that that event well at all. And it's hard to figure. And what is Oswald gonna do in Mexico? Excuse me, I'd like a visa so I can go get to Cuba and wind up back in Russia. You're kidding, right?
I guess you won't be buying Larry Hancock's new book then.
Well, nobody take this personally, please, but I haven't been reading Kennedy stuff lately. I mean,
Yeah.
this was enough. I'm seeing too much stuff. I think in 1 week I saw five new publications that I hadn't seen previously. The final answer on the Kennedy conspiracy. And I know they weren't the same five, it was 5 different answers. It's like watching Rob Reiner's stuff. Oh yeah, I went to Dallas. You got to understand, this is important enough to me that I went to Dallas. We all went to Dallas, Rob. Yeah, and it was the CIA, Mexican, Cuban exiles, the mafia. It was the usual, round up the usual suspects.
Well, do you think, or do you feel that Oswald was a genuine Marxist, or do you think he had ties to the intelligence community?
Well, you can actually do both. What he went through nowadays, and again, this goes back to what Neil said about, protocol has changed because you watch CSI and all of that. You be a good boy. As far as nowadays, the focus in these kind of protocol, please stop. The focus is on, be careful what your children are seeing on the internet because they're going to be lured into terrorist behaviors. Excuse me for a minute. You gotta stop. That kind of thing would have obtained way back when of somebody who grew up under the auspices of Mama Oswald, the ultimate economic black hole in the universe. You gotta stop. Could he have taken interest in something besides democracy? Sure. Was he intel related? Most likely. But he was a private, not a corporal, not a sergeant, and damn sure not an officer. He was, he was cannon fodder. And the cannon went off on the weekend of November 22nd. Why did he go home to get the gun? Why didn't he have it with him? If I'm going to shoot somebody Friday afternoon and I got a pistol, I'm going to have it with me because I'm not going to get out of that building shooting people with a rifle that had one remaining bullet. It's very difficult because he's been so thoroughly painted. Did he go to Russia because he was a Marxist or because it was an intel mission? That one's easy. He didn't go over there for Marxism, because if he had, he would have been back in about an hour.
Because didn't he say that when he was in the Russian embassy in Moscow, he told the council, I think his name was Richard Schneider, that I was warned by someone that you would try and talk me out of it, meaning renouncing his citizenship. Who would warn him about that?
Who told him who told him the best way to get to Moscow is via Helsinki?
Yep.
That's not common knowledge. Well, it certainly wasn't then. When I went through Helsinki. But it was different when I went. Very different.
Or were you on a false defector program then?
I don't think I made it. I don't think they like my credentials.
Nancy, do you want to ask your question with respect to David Lifton's latter work?
Sure. The last couple of years that David was still researching, he was really heavily digging into all of Lee's letters. And he had a supposition that they were written in code to communicate with his intelligence handlers. I wondered if you had ever thought about that, if you had ever talked with anyone that had thought about that, and what your comment is on that.
First of all, to the first part, no, I never gave it, never made that connection. As I told Neil the other day when we just got to say howdy do, Lifton's book was in existence in 1998. It was on the boards. You could find a listing, and the listing would tell you it has a bibliography, it has photographs, it's indexed. That only happens when the book exists. Now, it never got any further. And it certainly wasn't because some government agency wanted it killed, because they certainly would have killed John Armstrong's book if that was the case. But again, going back to what I said a few minutes ago, I don't think Oswald, I don't think he was remotely important enough that anybody would have cared. I mean, what could he have told them? You know, it's cold in Minsk. It reminds me of Detroit. I don't know. I don't know. It's he didn't have access. The one amazing thing that comes out of Oswald in Russia is that when you ask somebody, where did he work? Well, he worked in a radio factory. Yeah, he worked in a radio factory that also dealt in experimental radar. And he was a radar operator. You know, coincidence or conspiracy? Hello, dog. I don't know.
So then
No,
just to kind of follow up on that, then what's your thinking about why Lee went to Russia?
Cannon fodder. Somebody suggested, hey, make your bones, go to Russia. Because while the KGB is following him around and bugging his apartment, a real spy might just sneak in and not get noticed. But there was, you know, he talked about seeing vapor trails. Yeah, okay, there were aircraft overhead. He supposedly mentioned he saw a tank park where all manner of armored vehicles were. That's the way the Russians have almost always done with their military. The day that the Germans attacked Russia in June of 1941, the Russian Air Force was destroyed on the ground because it was all together. Here's all the planes lined up. Just put bullets in them and go home. I can't imagine what he could have learned. And there are stories where, you know, somebody at the radio plant told a joke, and Oswald laughed when everybody else laughed. Does that mean he could speak Russian? I don't know. I would have been curious. I would have told the joke with no punchline and pretended everybody laughed and see if he joined in. But they weren't. They weren't checking him out to that degree. I don't know. In terms of David Lifton, the first book, The Best Evidence, I read that book 6 times because I wanted to know what it was about. And I never really discovered what it was about. It was a theory that somebody grabbed a bullet out of Kennedy's head, and that was the real story to what happened. But it was never proven, and Lifton didn't prove it. And as far as the surgery went, namely in the top of the head, I don't know. So what I'm saying is, if I didn't totally subscribe to his first book, would I have totally subscribed to his second book? I don't know. I'd love to see what he thought, what his thoughts were. Because there certainly might be some kind of relevance, some kind of, you know, serious point to what he was trying to say and do. But, you know, I'm sure you, Nancy, have a good idea in terms of what the clues were and what was going on. You know, what was it? I led 3 lives. Supposedly Oswald watched that as a kid. And some of the testimony toward that end came from his brother Robert. And then you find out that Robert went away in the service months before I Led 3 Lives went on television in October. So Robert was not watching his little brother watching the spy stuff. Did Oswald want to be a spy? Lots of kids want to grow up to be spies in one way or another. I don't know. I don't know. I wish I did.
Okay. Well, I think in the last year or so, I learned through a DPUK presentation about this whole situation at Bethesda, in the sense of finding that there were 2 morgues at the time. I'm always kind of fascinated in this case that why can't everything just be singular and solo? Why are there always 2 or more of something? And it does lead you down rabbit holes, etc. But boy, I sure wish David was here to be able to help, you know, siphon through some of that information about finding about the old morgue and the new morgue, and why there's discrepancy
Did they
in
both
descriptions.
exist at the same time?
Sorry?
Did both of them exist at the same time?
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Because
so that's the interesting thing, is that's information that I don't think David ever got. And you know, and in fairness, I think David's personality often influenced, you know, how we might have reacted to his information, etc. And you know, Lordy, I had my ups and downs with him over the years because I met him
or
in the
lack
80s.
thereof,
Sorry?
personality or lack thereof.
Oh no, he definitely had a personality. That was pretty up front and center. But it did make it very challenging because he was not very accepting of discussions outside of his own parameter of thinking. But
I learned that fact.
yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's just very interesting that this thing about the morgues, the double morgues, and
I'm just
And-
amazed that nobody has ever come out and said that, because there's, you know, Jenkins in his tell-all book. He didn't know there was 2 morgues.
Yeah, this was
Right.
only recently discovered by Rick Russo, Walt.
yeah.
And I've seen people say that, you know, the Army, Walter Reed and Bethesda were together, and that's 2 morgues. No, in 1963 they were miles apart.
Hmm.
Miles.
No, this is 2 morgues definitely in Bethesda. It's about nearly a year ago. This presentation was made by Rick Russo and Brooks LaPlante. If you're interested, Walt, it's uploaded to our channel. It's fascinating. It's really good stuff. Yeah. Can I just move on to the sheriff's department? I mean, obviously you've focused a lot on the Dallas police. Clearly there were jurisdictional issues because this all occurred in the city of Dallas.
Right.
And we know that Decker had his men, you know, outside on the corner of Maine and Houston. Do you? I mean, to me, again, this seems absolutely ludicrous. You know, when you've got cops on vacation, cops on it, you know, who are ill. Why the hell are they not using those resources? I mean, particularly right here, there at the end of the motorcade. I mean, you've got to just get through Dilly Plaza, and then that's it. In theory, you know.
Yeah, well, Jesse Curry, decent and semi-honest guy that he was a figurehead. You know, there was serious infighting, and Decker banned it. Come on, stop. Decker was certainly part of it. I mean, he was head of his own law and order mafia. And as you said, yeah, they were out there, but they were out there to show essentially that they weren't out there. You know, hi, here we are, we're not protecting you. And when that car made the turn, you know, a couple of them could have reached out and high-fived the Kellerman. But what did they do? They rushed to the scene. Their perceptions are strange because they badly don't overlap in terms of perceptions. And they're where they are. 3 shots, 6 seconds. Where'd the shots come from? The crowd ran to the knoll. The deputies followed the crowd. Why did the crowd run to the knoll? According to the Warren Commission, it was because they wanted to get out of the line of fire. So they ran from Commerce Street, crossed the grass, crossed Elm, and went up the hill.
Walt, don't you have a member or two of the sheriff's department on the stand in your book, The People V?
That was 33 years ago. I don't remember who all was on the stand. There might have been, you know, certainly there was room for it, because one thing you have to do is make the case that this thing was horribly done, which we've talked to today here. And if it was horribly done, how do you know, if you put all the ingredients from the pantry into a pan and bake it, the pie isn't going to be very good. And that's what this was. And it's just, I don't know, the whole, you know, the fish stinks. Roger Craig, we know what happened to him. He got a lousy deal. And if you wanted to get promotions, you dressed like Decker.
Well, what do you think about the new book that came out about Roscoe White? Do you have any views on that? You mentioned him earlier in relation to Liggett, and they're buried close by.
I have not seen the new book, Roscoe White. What I've been reading for the last 2 years is almost exclusively Hitler and Stalin at war. I did a chronology on it, and I figured it would come in handy once we became the Fourth Reich here on this side of the ocean. And it's coming true. So I have the most recent Kennedy book I have read, I don't know chronologically which would fit. I read Jenkins' book about parts of Kennedy that were being cut off as souvenirs. And I read Josiah Thompson's The Last Second in Dallas. But that's, you know, I
mean, you mentioned John Liggett earlier on.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, his story came to prominence in The Men Who Killed Kennedy, or at least that's where I heard about it.
Yeah, via J. Harrison.
Right, that was via J. Harrison. So
that was one of his.
Do you think he was involved in some kind of medical procedure to change wounds, etc.?
He was, first of all, eventually, I think he was the one that put Jane Mansfield back together in '67. But thinking about it and saying, yeah, that's what happened is there's a chasm there. Something doesn't make sense. Clearly. He was presiding over a funeral when the assassination happened. Then he's gone for 23 or 24 hours. He gets back. We got to hide out, folks. And I put the story I think that's in Treachery and Doubt. No. Might be, it's somewhere. It's in one of the books. And I heard from his brother, Melvin Liggett, who wasn't happy that his brother wasn't getting a good press. And John Liggett was a killer, among other things. And it's possible that he may even have killed the LBJ lookalike that was making the rounds. But you can't prove it. It's, we can find 1,000 things wrong with the story as we've been told. But fixing any of those thousands involve proof, rock solid proof. And if you're waiting to find it in this document release that might happen, you're going to be disappointed. And that's sad. That's sad. Anything that would be of value, or let me rephrase that, anything that ever would have been of value in a governmentally controlled document is gone. And if you've ever seen the redactions, there's only 4 words on a page that should have 300. But it's released now. Well, that's great. Like I said before, there's still secrets from the War of 1812. That's the way we've been operating. And it's not going to get any better. And releasing RFK documents, all you have to read is the autopsy. I spoke to the doctor, the famous doctor that did the autopsy on Bobby Kennedy. He said, yeah, he was killed from a shot from behind. No doubt. Okay. Why is there doubt? Because the government says he was shot by this guy over here in front of him. So, I don't know.
Okay. Look, we've been doing this for quite a few hours now. Probably like to wind it up. Are there any other questions you'd like to ask, Walt, before we close?
Has Walt, I came to the party a bit late here, unfortunately. Did you speak about your experiences with Marina Oswald?
Yes, I did.
Oh, you did, right. Fair enough. Fair enough.
I didn't make any mention of the 18 mysteries I've written in the last 10 years, but
That was going to be my closing remarks, Walt.
yeah, this is your commercial.
That you've written all these crime.
Yeah, and
Novel.
most of them they're set in my hometown. I'm the detective, and it's written in first person, which is a little bit unusual. Is the CD still available? Yes, it is. I just had fun writing. I did a couple. Trine Day published one of them. Sort of published it. They didn't pay. Yeah, it's a trick of theirs. They don't pay. They published it, I think, so that I would say, "Oh yeah, Judy Baker's a superstar," and I wasn't going to say that because it's not the truth. You can now let Bandit out. Bandit does not go out. Thank you. He doesn't go out. He's got 12,000 square feet fenced in back there, and he goes out and eats the deer poop, and he chases the deer away. So he's a house pup. Yeah, the 18 mysteries have been fun. It brings in my law enforcement experience, my research experience, and I try to put for the keen of people with keen sense of noticing things. There's usually something Kennedy related in every one of the stories. It's happening right here in town, but make sure you set up a roadblock at the corner of Elm and Houston, that kind of thing. Or the two guys that are having a discussion about something, are Kellerman and Greer. They're not going to come out of the grave and argue about it. And I'm not making them out to be idiots either. But it's been fun. It's been fun.
Have they got your sort of sarcastic trait in them, these novels?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
I wouldn't do it if I couldn't do that.
Well, can I ask you one more thing?
Sure.
if my memory serves me correctly, didn't you know somebody that knew one of the master riflemen that tested
Yes,
the Mannlicher?
I knew him.
You knew him. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, when you read about the recreations of the shooting, they built a little stand about 30 feet high out in the middle of the desert, and they had a car. No, they didn't have a car drive by. That was Donahue did that. They had silhouettes at the appropriate places, and they had someone, Frazier from the FBI, and someone described as Specialist Miller. That's it. That's all you learn about the guy. Specialist Miller was a Department of Justice weapons officer. And when I worked for DOJ 1969, 1971, he was my weapons officer. And I got to talking to him. You know, you were the one that with the rifle. He said, yeah. He said, I could hit the targets, but not in 6 seconds. Or I could fire 3 shots in less than 6 seconds and not hit the targets. And they're stationary. And they had practice. And when you put it all together, he was basically saying it's rubbish. And I should add, this guy was a hell of a shot. On the last day of our training cycle, 80 guys went out to the range to shoot. And if you scored 487 or higher, you got a trophy from the director. I shot 492. And that was the highest. And I still have the trophy. It's got somebody's clothes hanging on it. But I saw, and the gun that I used, it wasn't my gun. It was just off the table. Bancroft C. Miller, who was the weapons officer, he came over and we were talking afterwards. And from that day on, I never had to practice shoot again. He and I would go and shoot shotguns or Thompsons, whatever. And he, fun guy to be around with a smoky hat on. But he couldn't do what Oswald did. And this guy, I've told the story a dozen times. This guy could pull 2 guns out of 2 holsters and he'd take off both ears on a flea without otherwise hurting the flea. That's how good a shot this guy was. He took my gun on the same course and got a 497. And I was proud of the 492.
So no Maggie's drawers.
What's that?
So no Maggie's drawers.
No. I had 1.8. I had a bunch of 10s, a couple of 9s, and 1.8. And we heard guys in the DOJ that they walked them over 5-10 feet from the target, took the bullets out of the gun and said, throw them. And they still had problems hitting the target. They're out there. Or they were. I'm sure they're all retired. That was a lifetime ago. But yeah.
Okay, well, I think we probably do need to wrap it up. Just one final comment, which Peter has put in the chat box. Yeah, just to reiterate again, thank you for sending those copies of your last Kennedy book, Kennedy Execution.
That's the end of them. I've still got some of these, and there's still some of these, but I have the Kennedy Execution. When somebody orders it on Amazon, I have to print it out and get it spiral bound up the block.
Right, gotcha. But thank you for what you did several years ago. All right, guys, I think we'll probably wrap up.
Thank you for inviting me today. This was
it's been our pleasure.
Walt, what an honor.
You've certainly been on my list as a potential guest for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years now.
God willing, I'd love to come back.
Well, I'll talk to you offline. I'll contact you again regarding the possibility of doing something for us in June. I mean, this is a really big event for us. It's a 3-day thing. It's the 30th anniversary. We're kind of commemorating Ian Griggs as well. We've got some really good speakers. people that won't be throwing, chairs at other speakers. They're all
Oh, Fetzer's not gonna be there?
no, he didn't make the cut, I'm afraid. But yeah, so hopefully you'll be able to do something else for us in the future.
Fantastic.
Don't mind the sarcasm.
Oh, we love it. Oh, this is our British sense of humor. We love it.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you want to just close that off now and just stop the recording? You've probably got control, haven't you?